"That," the Duke of Briarstone declared, wiping water from his face with 2 fingers and the quiet dignity of a man who had simply decided, in that moment, to be calm. That was not what he had anticipated for the afternoon. Thomasina Ashford still held the bucket. Her hands, in the immediate aftermath, had quite forgotten their next purpose. "I am so tremendously sorry," she managed. He pulled a small piece of watercress from his cravat. It seemed to have been living in the bucket and had opted, at the crucial moment, to join him. "Are you?" He sounded, and this was the part she would never quite be able to explain, interested, not offended, not angry, interested, as though he had anticipated a moderately dull afternoon and had received something far more enlightening. "I was aiming for someone else," she said. "I thought you might have been." He looked at the bucket, then at her, then at the fate continuing in cheerful ignorance at the far end of the garden. "Anyone I know?" That was the moment, though Thomasina Ashford could not have named it as such at the time, when things took an entirely new direction. Thomasina Ashford had spent 4 months, 2 weeks, and an accumulation of increasingly humiliating Sunday mornings under the shadow of a lie she had not told. Gerald Fenwick had decided she was forward, and had said so to everyone who would listen, which was in Briarfield everyone. She had made plans for Gerald Fenwick. Good ones, she had thought. Entirely reasonable ones, involving a bucket, a quantity of water, the east gate of the vicarage garden, and a great deal of satisfaction. She had not accounted for the Duke. Nobody, she would later reflect, ever does. This is a story for anyone who has ever had an excellent plan undone by someone arriving at exactly the wrong moment, or, depending on how it all turned out, exactly the right one. All characters and events in this story are fictional, made up for your enjoyment. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight, the city, the hour, whatever you would like to share. I read every one. To understand Thomasina Ashford's plan, you first had to understand Gerald Fenwick. Gerald Fenwick was 36 years old, the eldest son of Squire Fenwick of Briarfield, and the sort of man who considered himself charming in the way that certain breeds of dog consider themselves lap-sized, with complete confidence and very little supporting evidence. He was pleasant enough to look at, if you did not look closely. He spoke fluently and often and on all subjects, which he distributed across every available conversation with the generosity of a man who has never been asked to stop. In March of that year, he had decided he would like to marry Thomasina Ashford. In March of that year, Thomasina Ashford had decided she would not. This would have been the unremarkable end of it, had Gerald Fenwick been a different sort of man. But he was the sort of man who received a polite refusal as a misunderstanding, a firm refusal as a challenge, and a direct refusal delivered at Mrs. Forsyth's card party with 12 witnesses, and every atom of Thomasina's clarity as a personal attack requiring response. The response had been conversational. It had been efficient, and it had spread as these things do in villages. With the speed and enthusiasm of something, everyone was very interested in not being caught discussing. By April, Briarfield had heard that Thomasina Ashford was forward. By May, she was considered unconventional, which in the vocabulary of Briarfield was only one step removed from dangerous. By June, the word difficult had begun to circulate in the better drawing rooms, spoken in the tone people use for weather they cannot control, and have resigned themselves to mentioning. Her aunt, Mrs. Aldrich Ashford, had stopped being invited to 3 specific teas that she had attended, without incident for 11 consecutive years. It was this, not the whispers about herself, which she could endure, but the quiet shrinking of her aunt's world on her behalf, that had produced the plan. "It is fine," Thomasina told Principal, who was unconvinced. Principal was a beagle of compact body, large ears and moral authority, out of all proportion to his size. He had been her father's dog first. The Reverend Ashford had received him as a puppy and named him with enormous optimism on the occasion, noting aloud that every household required both a dog and a governing principal, and that he saw no compelling reason to make them separate. Whether Principal had fulfilled this mandate was a matter of perspective. He had not governed the household. He had governed everyone in it, individually and according to his own assessments, and had considered this sufficient. He was 5 years old now, and he had the particular gaze of an animal who has arrived at his opinions through careful observation and does not expect to be argued out of them. He turned his head to one side, ears swaying slightly, like a dog prepared to hear more. "I am fine," Thomasina said again. "I simply require a better plan." The plan had taken 6 weeks to arrive at, 2 long conversations with her friend Dorinda Pell, and the observation, noted on a Tuesday morning and confirmed over the following 3 weeks of careful monitoring, that Gerald Fenwick took his daily constitutional through the lane behind St. Michael's every morning at 10:30, and that on the day of the village summer fete, this lane led through the east gate of the vicarage garden, where Thomasina had volunteered to help with the flower arrangements. The east gate had steps. The steps were at a height that was, she had measured, precise. A bucket, filled from the garden well and placed at the top of the steps, would, if tipped at the correct moment, travel an excellent arc and descend with considerable effect onto the head of a person passing through the gate below. It was not, she was fully aware, the most sophisticated approach to the situation. There would be no permanent consequence. He would not learn a lesson. He would simply be wet, and she would have done something rather than nothing, and sometimes that was the shape that sanity took. She had told Dorinda, who had looked at her for a long moment, and then said, "Oh, Tamsin, that is brilliant, and also a catastrophic idea. Both are true simultaneously." "Thank you," Thomasina had said. "I'm proceeding." She had not told her aunt, who had an excellent sense for trouble, and would have had objections of both the practical and the moral variety, and who had also done nothing to deserve the additional anxiety. She had not told Principal, who appeared to have worked it out independently, and had taken to sitting beside the bucket each morning with the expression of a witness preparing to testify. The fete was on the 12th of July. On the 11th she had done what she always did the night before, something that required precision. She had sat at the kitchen table and gone through it, step by step. She had also, on the 11th, thought for a very long time about November. The card party at Mrs. Forsyth's, the library. She had been looking for Cowper's letters, which was not a remarkable ambition on a card party evening. Mrs. Forsyth kept the library open during these occasions, because she had the excellent opinion that people who were not interested in cards needed somewhere to be. Thomasina had gone in, had found the letters, and had been turning toward the door when Gerald Fenwick had come in behind her and closed it. She had the letters in her hands. He had the expression of a man who had planned something and was pleased with himself. He had said she was lovely and bright, and that he very much hoped she knew she was not indifferent to him. She had said she was quite sure she was indifferent to him, and that she thought it best he know this clearly. He had said she was refusing because she was playing a game, and that she would find in time she had miscalculated. She had said she did not think so, and that he might move away from the door. He had moved. She had left. The library had contained in that moment 12 candles, 1 copy of Cowper's letters, and enough witnessed silence that she had not imagined any of it. There had been a footman in the hall outside. The door had been thin. He had told his version the following week. She had not heard it until it had already settled into the fabric of the village, like a stain in old cloth, the kind that does not respond to ordinary cleaning. Principal made a sound of low and steady opinion. "I know," she said. The fete was on the 12th of July. The sun came out, which it did not always trouble to do in July, and the bunting was bright, and the vicarage garden smelled of sweet peas and cut grass, and the particular hopeful fragrance of an English summer that knows perfectly well it will not last. Children were running. Mrs. Holt had her preserves table laid out under the elm. The ladies' sewing circle had arranged their embroidered goods in alphabetical order of the embroiderer, which nobody had asked for, but several people admired. Thomasina positioned herself on the steps at 23 minutes past 10. She waited. At 27 minutes past, the gate began to open. She tipped the bucket. She did not miss. This was the part that would resist any tidy explanation. The arc of the water was, by any reasonable measure, good. She had aimed for the figure coming through the gate, and had hit it. If the afternoon had gone differently, if the figure had been the correct figure, the whole enterprise would have been a complete success, and nobody in Briarfield would have heard the end of it. The problem was the figure. He was taller than Gerald Fenwick. He wore a coat that was considerably darker than Gerald Fenwick's coat, and considerably better made, and it was comprehensively and immediately ruined. He carried a hat that now sat on the garden path, having separated from its owner at the crucial moment. He had the posture of a man who had spent a formative number of years in rooms where posture was noticed, and had absorbed the lesson so thoroughly that even standing in a gate being soaked with watercress water, he maintained it. He stood in the gate. The bucket was empty. The watercress had formed its own opinions about the situation and had settled on his cravat. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds, which is enough time, Thomasina found, to understand everything that has just gone wrong. He was the first to move. He extracted the watercress from his cravat with 2 fingers, regarded it briefly, and placed it on the stone wall of the gate as one might place something down that one is done with. She was the first to speak, which was either bravery or the complete absence of any better option. "I'm so tremendously sorry," she said. "I was aiming for someone else. I thought you might have been." His voice was even, not clipped, not cold, simply the voice of a man who was, against all precedent, taking this calmly. He looked at the bucket in her hands, then at her face. His eyes were amber in the afternoon light, the amber of old window glass in a south-facing room, and their expression was something she had not expected. Curiosity. "Anyone I know?" "Mr. Gerald Fenwick." "Ah," a brief pause. "Yes, I can see that." She was on the steps. He was in the gate. Between them, approximately 2 feet of air, and approximately the most embarrassing moment of her adult life. "I am Sebastian Ravenscroft," he said, "the Duke of Briarstone." She knew this in the theoretical way one knows a fact one has not applied in some time. Sebastian Ravenscroft had been the Duke of Briarstone for 7 years, and he had spent the last 3 in London, and his estate bordered the western edge of Briarfield, and everyone in the village had opinions about him at a comfortable distance, in the way one has opinions about weather in another county. She had not seen him in person since she was 17, and he had attended her father's Christmas service out of some combination of neighbourly obligation and whatever private calculation dukes make about which churches to sit in, and he had occupied the 3rd pew with the expression of a man reconsidering his Sundays. "I know," she said. "You are—" "Thomasina Ashford." She came down the steps, because standing above him on the steps while he dripped seemed to compound an already crowded situation. "Yes. The forward one, by current account." He looked at her for a moment in which she had no idea what he was thinking. Then he looked at the garden path where his hat was sitting in a small lake of itself. "He came through an hour ago," the Duke said. "Fenwick. I saw him on the lane. We exchanged a few words." She stared at him. "He is at the far end of the fete," the Duke added, his tone entirely without drama. "Looking at the ribbons, I believe." There was a silence that Thomasina experienced as quite long. "The ribbons," she repeated. He seemed very interested in them. She looked at the empty bucket. She looked at the Duke of Briarstone, who was soaking wet and apparently entirely fine with this. A small rivulet was travelling from the brim of his hat, which had not moved from the garden path, toward the rose bed. The watercress had decided it preferred the gate wall. "You could still go and find him," the Duke said, "if you wished." "I still have—" He glanced at her hands. "The bucket. Technically." She looked at the bucket. He looked at her. And Thomasina Ashford, who had not laughed in something approaching 2 months, made a sound that was 3 parts mortification and 1 part something freer, something that had been waiting. It was not dignified. It was entirely genuine. "I cannot," she said. "I have used the bucket." "You have," he agreed. "And you are soaked, yes, completely." He retrieved his hat from the path with the equanimity of a man accepting a minor inconvenience of nature. "Do you have another bucket?" "I do not." "Then perhaps we should find some other arrangement." He settled the hat on his head, which did nothing to help the hat and everything to restore a certain order to the proceeding. What arrangement he meant was not clear to her. What was clear, with a clarity she did not particularly trust, was that he was not talking about Fenwick. "You mentioned being forward," he said. "I mentioned that people call me so. There is a distinction." "I have been making it for 4 months," she said. "Nobody in Briarfield is currently listening." The Duke of Briarstone looked at her. Not the assessing look of a man cataloguing a woman, the listening look of a person who finds what another person has said worth responding to. "I," he said, "am listening. Am—" By the end of the afternoon, Briarfield had done what Briarfield did best, which was observe, interpret and distribute. The Duke had been seen talking with Thomasina Ashford in the vicarage garden for approximately 20 minutes. He had attended the fête, which he had not done in 3 years. He had purchased a jar of Mrs. Holt's summer preserves and a handkerchief embroidered by Mrs. Carver, which suggested he had walked the full length of the tables. He had also been observed by 6 separate people to be wearing a coat that was, by any generous description, remarkably damp. Nobody asked directly, but the particular atmosphere of a village working something out settled over Briarfield like the change in air before rain. Thomasina felt it on the walk home and tried not to think about what it meant. Dorinda Pell, who had witnessed the entire thing from behind the lemonade table, fell into step beside her before she had reached the lane. "Tamsin," said Dorinda, "you soaked the Duke, I'm aware. You soaked the Duke and then spoke to him for 20 minutes. 19. Dorinda looked at her with the expression of someone who has information and is deciding how to deliver it. "He looked," she said carefully, "as though he was enjoying himself. He was being polite. He was wet." Dorinda was quiet for a moment, which was a state Dorinda occupied rarely and with great purpose. "He bought preserves," she said. "People buy preserves. He does not come to the fête. He hasn't come in 3 years. He came today and he came through the east gate." She slowed. "Tamsin, why did he come through the east gate? The main entrance is on the south." Thomasina had not considered this. She considered it now. The east gate opened onto a private path connecting the Briarstone Hall grounds to the vicarage garden. It was not a public route. It was a family route, maintained for the use of the families on either side of the wall, and the families on either side of the wall were hers, or had been, and his. He had come through a private gate on the day of the fête, on the day she had been specifically waiting at the top of the steps with a bucket. She filed this information in the place she kept things she was not ready to examine yet, and told Dorinda she thought it was probably nothing. Dorinda gave her a look that communicated she thought it was probably not nothing, but she had the wisdom to keep her own counsel, which was one of the things Thomasina had always valued in her. The second development arrived 2 days later. Principal found the Duke. This was not a plan of Principal's. Principal did not plan in any formal sense. He moved through the world as a radical empiricist, investigating each thing as it presented itself and forming immediate and binding conclusions. What mattered? Food, specific trees, visitors whose trouser hems carried the faint history of other dogs. What did not matter? Social convention, time of day, or anyone's preferred narrative about how the morning walk was supposed to proceed. Thomasina had taken him along the lane bordering the Briarstone estate, as she did every morning, because it was a lane with excellent hedgerows, and he had opinions about the hedgerows, and she had, until recently, had no reason to think anyone from the estate would be walking the lane at 8 in the morning. The Duke was walking the lane at 8 in the morning. Principal stopped, assessed, sat down. The sitting down was the significant part. Principal did not sit down for everyone. He did not sit down for Gerald Fenwick at any point in their entire acquaintance, which was a data point Thomasina had not adequately attended to at the time. The Duke looked down at the beagle in his path with an expression of mild and genuine surprise. Then he did something Thomasina had not expected. He crouched down, on the lane, in perfectly good breeches, and scratched Principal's ears. Principal made the sound of a creature who has found something he has been looking for. "He does not do that for everyone," Thomasina said, because something had to be said. "I am honored." The Duke stood, looking easier than he had at the fête. A plainer coat, a more practical hat. The quality of a man who walks early because he wants to, not because he's being seen to. "Good morning, Miss Ashford." "Good morning, Your Grace." She looked at her dog, who had now settled himself approximately on top of the Duke's left foot. "I apologize. He's quite comfortable. Leave him if you would." She left him. They stood in the lane in the early morning, which smelled of nettles and dew and the preliminary stages of a day. that had not decided what it was going to be yet, while Principal made himself at home on a duke's foot and appeared to have no plans for movement. This became over the next 2 weeks a pattern, not a formal one, nothing arranged. The lane existed and Principal required walking, and the Duke was, it emerged, a man who walked the estate boundary in the early morning as a matter of preference, not performance. The lane was bordered on one side by hawthorn that smelled of nothing in particular in July and everything in May, and on the other by the estate wall, which was old stone with moss in the gaps, and a specific unevenness underfoot, where a tree root had been working on the path for 30 years. Thomasina knew every inch of it. She had been walking it since she was old enough to hold Principal's lead, and before that had walked it with her father, who had talked to the hedgerows in much the same way Principal did, though with more words and different conclusions. What she learned, walking it with Sebastian Ravenscroft for 6 weeks, was that a lane you know well is not the same lane when someone new is looking at it with you. He noticed things she had stopped registering, the particular lean of the elm at the far end, the way the estate wall caught the morning light at an angle that made it look warm, even in cold weather. The fieldfare that appeared in the same section of hedgerow every Tuesday in a way that suggested either loyalty or poor navigation. He asked about the elm. She told him about the tree root and the uneven stone, and he crouched down to look at where the path had lifted, and she had the peculiar sensation of seeing something familiar made interesting again, which was, she was beginning to think, the particular effect he had on most things. He walked quietly. He spoke when he had something to say and did not when he did not. He asked questions with a directness she had not encountered in men who did not already know her, and he listened to the answers in the specific way of a person who is not waiting to speak but genuinely following what is being said. He asked about her father on the second morning, which she had not expected. The Reverend Ashford had been a quiet man, bookish in the way of someone who reads not to be considered intellectual, but because books were genuinely where he lived when life did not require him elsewhere. He had had a passion for early botanical illustrations that ran deeper than his wages could support, and a complete inability to pass any dog on any road without stopping to speak to it at length. Sebastian Ravenscroft had, it turned out, met him. He lent me a book once, the Duke said, about Flemish horticultural prints. I was 14, I had not asked for it. He simply appeared at the estate with it and said he thought I would find it of interest. That sounds exactly like him, Thomasina said. Did he do that often? To everyone? She was quiet for a moment. He believed books found the right people when they were walked toward them. He used to say he was just helping with the logistics. The Duke was quiet for a moment in a way that felt like recognition. I kept it, he said. The book. It's still at the hall somewhere. She had not expected this. It settled in her chest in the way small particular things sometimes do, which is more firmly than larger ones. They walked on. Principal moved between them, sniffing the hedge, issuing commentary. He is the most opinionated dog I have ever encountered, the Duke said, on the 4th morning. He was raised by a vicar, Thomasina said. He has a highly developed moral architecture. The Duke made a sound that was close to a laugh. It was a specific kind of laugh, not performed, not deployed for effect, but the sound of someone surprised out of their composure by something they genuinely found funny, which was, she had noticed, different from the social version and considerably better. Does he have views on Fenwick? She looked at him sideways. He never once sat down for him. The Duke was quiet for a moment. Then he said with the careful tone of someone delivering information they would prefer not to be delivering, Fenwick has been speaking to Lord Pemberton in Whitmore. He is telling people you poured water on him deliberately at the fete, as a public insult. She stopped walking. He looked at the hedge, which was not implicated in any of this. He is describing it as an act of ungovernable behavior. The water? You. She had many things to say to that. None of them were useful in a lane at 8 in the morning with a dog watching and the whole day still to be got through. She held them, which took more effort than she showed. Principal, who appeared to have followed the entire conversation, stood up from the Duke's foot and walked over to sit on hers. "Thank you," she said to the dog. She was not entirely certain which of them she meant. The Duke of Briarstone had been in London for 3 years. This was not unusual for a man of his position. Men of his position went to London. They attended Parliament, or the clubs, or the dinners that produced Parliament, which was not the same thing but served many of the same functions. They were seen. They made their assessments. They received invitations and extended them and moved through the city in the particular current that wealth and title generate, which carries you along very efficiently and delivers you to nothing in particular. Sebastian Ravenscroft had found London at the end of 3 years to be a place he understood completely, and found insufficient in a way he could not precisely name. He had friends who were pleasant. He had dinners that ran smoothly. He had evenings that were perfectly organized and contained very little that he would have missed if they had not happened. He had begun to feel, quietly and without drama, like a man maintaining a house he did not live in. He had come home to Briarstone in June to attend to the estate business that accumulated reliably in his absence, intending to stay the summer and return in the autumn. He had been telling himself this for approximately 3 weeks before he stopped believing it. What had actually begun it was Gerald Fenwick, which was not the origin story he would have chosen for himself. In May, 3 weeks before his return, he had been at his club at an hour when the room was moderately full, and the conversations overlapping in the way they do when the evening is warm and nobody is in a hurry. Fenwick had been at the far end of the room with 3 other men talking with the easy confidence of someone who has an entertaining story and knows it. Sebastian had not been listening until he was. The story was about a woman. It always was with Fenwick. Sebastian had placed him as a type within the first 2 minutes of their acquaintance, which had been at the same club, in this same room, 4 years earlier. The Fenwick type was not rare. They told stories about women in the way that certain men told stories about property, with the assumption that their having wanted it made the narrative about them, regardless of what the property had to say on the subject. This story was about a vicar's daughter in a village in Hampshire who had made a scene at a card party when he chose not to pursue her. The story was told smoothly. It had the specific internal logic of a lie built on a true event. The event happened. The interpretation had been entirely fabricated, and the fabrication had been calibrated to be just believable enough that nobody in the room would think to question it. Sebastian had set down his glass carefully. He had not said anything. He had not known the woman. There was nothing concrete to say. He had noted with the clarity he had developed over years of watching men in rooms that Fenwick was performing confidence rather than possessing it, the particular brightness of a man who is not sure what he is getting away with and has decided to commit fully to the attempt. He had come home in June. He had walked the estate in the early mornings and found that it was better than he had remembered, and he had been thinking about what to do about Fenwick in some vague and unformed way, the way one thinks about something one has not yet found the shape of. The fete had been on the 12th of July. He had gone through the east gate because it was his gate, and because Fenwick was expected to be at the fete, and because he had wanted, without making anything of it, to see for himself. He had a habit of forming his own opinions before accepting other people's, and the habit had generally served him. He had not expected the bucket. That particular afternoon, the empty bucket, the watercress, the young woman on the steps with an expression of someone who had arrived at a situation through entirely logical steps and was prepared to accept the consequences, had told him, with an efficiency that 12 months in London had not matched, quite a lot of things he had needed to know. He told her some of this on a Wednesday morning in the 4th week of July. They had stopped at the stile at the end of the lane, where the Briarstone fields opened out into something golden and wide, and Principal was investigating a patch of interesting ground nearby with the focused concentration of a scholar. "You came to the fete because of something you heard in London," she said. "Yes." She looked out over the fields. The light on the barley at that hour was the particular light of early summer mornings, thin, generous, the kind that makes everything look as though it has just been made. "He was at your club," she said. "Yes. He told people about me. He told people a story." The Duke kept his voice even because the even version was the accurate one. They are not the same thing. She absorbed this without looking at him. She had a quality he had noticed over these weeks of receiving information completely, not rushing to respond, not performing the reception of it, just actually taking it in, the way good soil takes rain. "You came to see if I was what he described," she said. "I came to see what was true." She turned to look at him then, and her hazel eyes had in them the careful, assessing quality he had come to recognize, the look of someone who had learned to examine what was offered to her before deciding what to do with it. "And were you satisfied?" He considered the fields. He considered the dog. He considered the morning she had held the empty bucket with the expression of someone prepared to accept all consequences of a reasonable plan, and how that particular combination of recklessness and dignity had been the most interesting thing he had encountered in recent memory. "Not yet," he said. This was not precisely what he had intended to say. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the fields. "No," she said quietly, as though settling something. "I suppose not." The mornings settled into a shape. In the first week, they talked when there was something to say. In the second, the silences began to feel like a form of talking too, a parallel conversation running alongside the spoken one, made up of pauses and the small gestures that substitute for words when words are too much. The way he let Principal pull him left along the hedgerow without complaint, the way she slowed her pace without noticing when he had something to say, the way they both moved for the same dry patch of path when the verge was wet, and neither of them acknowledged this. By the third week, she had stopped thinking of him as the Duke in the abstract sense, the civic fact of a title, the figure at the edge of the village's awareness, and had started thinking of him in the particular sense, the way he held his hat when the wind came off the fields, the way he looked at the elm on Tuesdays. This was, she recognized, a distinction with consequences. Neither of them announced this. There was no agreement, no arrangement made aloud, but Thomasina walked the lane with Principal at 8, and the Duke walked the boundary of his estate at 8, and the lane was the boundary of his estate, and this arrangement continued for 6 weeks without either of them suggesting it should change. She learned things about him in the way one learns things about a person in the early morning, which is reliably, the morning strips away the version of a person they maintain for the afternoon. He had grown up at Briarstone and had not expected to like it as much as he found he did when he came back to it. He had been in London because that was where men of his position went, and he had been good at being there, and being good at something had, for a long time, seemed sufficient reason to continue. She was quiet about this for a moment. Then she said, "It is not the same thing. What isn't? Being good at a place and belonging to it." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly it." She learned that he read everything, with the undifferentiated appetite of someone who considers information inherently interesting regardless of the subject. She learned that he had an opinion about the estate's drainage that had been forming for 3 years while he was in London and was now emerging in detailed form. She learned that he had the quality, rare in her experience in any person, of being capable of silence without making it uncomfortable. She told him about the school. She had not intended to go on about it at such length. She had mentioned it once, briefly, and then found herself still talking about it 15 minutes later, with the full account of Thomas Kendall's progress with the newspaper, and the 2 Elmwood tables she had borrowed from the vestry, and the biscuit that Alice Marsh kept in her apron pocket in case of difficulty, and she had stopped herself only when she noticed the Duke was listening with the same attention he gave the fields. "I am sorry," she said. "This is not a particularly compelling subject. It is to me. Because—" He considered the lane ahead of them. "Because you are good at it," he said simply, "and good at a thing tends to be interesting." She had not known what to do with that. It was such a plain and true thing to say, not complimentary in the performing sense, not charming in the way that announces itself as charm. Just an observation, made clearly, by a person who had noticed something real. She was not accustomed to that. She found she did not know where to put it, so she carried it home with her, which was also not something she was accustomed to. On the 6th week, on a Thursday morning when the weather had finally made up its mind about rain, and was delivering it with some commitment, they walked anyway. Principal was entirely indifferent to rain, and Thomasina had never been in the habit of reorganizing herself around weather, and the Duke apparently felt the same. He said, "Fenwick has been to Pemberton again." She adjusted her grip on her umbrella. "What now?" "He is saying you have been pursuing me," the Duke said, with the tone of a man delivering news that he is aware is both absurd and inconvenient, "that you have engineered meetings in the lane, that the fate incident was a pretext." She stopped walking. In the rain. For a full second. "He is saying," she said. "He is." "That I arranged to soak you in a bucket of water," she said, "as a strategy to attract your interest. He is." She stood in the rain and thought about Gerald Fenwick, and the particular creativity of a man who cannot imagine that his own narrative might be wrong. And she thought about 4 months of careful management and 12 witnesses and the card party in November, and every conversation she had not had, and every tea her aunt had not been invited to, and she breathed. The rain came straight down. No wind, just the steady, patient fall of it on the hawthorn and the estate wall, and the two of them standing in it while Principal investigated a wet clump of grass with complete indifference to the weather, which she had always found one of his better qualities. The Duke waited. He was standing in the rain with the patience of a man who has all the time available. "He is going to do this indefinitely," she said. "He is going to keep changing the story as the story changes until there is nothing left for me to correct." "Yes," said the Duke, "probably. And there is nothing to be done about it." The Duke considered the lane ahead. "I did not say that." She looked at him. He said nothing else. He started walking again, and she walked beside him, and Principal splashed through a puddle with great purpose, and the morning rain came down around them, and Thomasina thought about the particular shape of that pause. The dinner at Mrs. Forsyth's assembly rooms in the 3rd week of August was 14 people, an adequate remove of cold meats, and 2 conversations that had nothing to do with the cold meats. Thomasina arrived with her aunt and Dorinda. She had spent some time dressing, which she did not usually spend much time on, and had argued herself out of 2 choices before arriving at a third that she had told herself was simply practical. Her aunt had said nothing, and had not looked at her in any particular way, which was how she communicated that she was saying nothing on purpose. The Duke arrived 20 minutes later, which she noted only because she found herself noting it, and would have preferred not to. She had known he was invited. She had thought about this fact a more than reasonable number of times in the preceding days, and had told herself it was because she was still navigating a social situation, and it was useful to know who would be in the room. This was accurate. It was not the complete account. Gerald Fenwick arrived with his father, Squire Fenwick, who was a large red-faced man with a good heart, and a son he did not rein in, which was one of life's less satisfying combinations. Gerald had a brightness about him that evening, the specific brightness of a man who feels he holds something. The dinner ran through its courses without incident. The conversation moved in the normal channels. Thomasina ate carefully and spoke pleasantly, and watched Fenwick from across the table with the peripheral focus she had developed for exactly this purpose. He waited until the dessert. "Miss Ashford," he said with the calibrated lightness of a man who has practiced this, "I have been wondering, whatever became of that famous bucket of yours?" The table registered the shift the way tables do, not loudly, but with a quality of collective attention that meant something with an edge had arrived. "I have several buckets," Thomasina said. "You will have to be specific. The one from the fete." He smiled easily. "I heard you created quite a sensation. I was helping with the flower arrangements." "So I heard." His smile held. He had clearly prepared this. "I heard you were very enthusiastic about it." She looked at her dessert. She looked at Gerald Fenwick. She was developing a response, and she had several prepared, and was selecting the right one for the room, the company, the precise level of damage she could do versus the level she would be seen to have intended, when the Duke spoke. He said it from the other end of the table in a conversational tone, the tone of a man raising a mild point of fact at a meeting where accuracy matters. "I was there," he said. "At the fete. I came through the east gate." A brief pause, the pause of someone recalling something, not the pause of someone performing recollection. Miss Ashford was arranging the flowers. "I got in her way." He said it with the particular weight of someone who does not need to raise his voice to be heard. 14 people heard him perfectly. The table was quiet again, but with a different quality of quiet. Fenwick's smile remained, with effort. "Your Grace is too generous." "Not at all." The Duke reached for his wine with complete ease. She was very gracious about it. He said nothing else. There was nothing else to say. The room had received the 2 accounts, Fenwick's and the Duke's, and had done the calculation that rooms do, which is less about evidence and more about belief, and the result was written, however briefly, on the face of everyone present. Gerald Fenwick did not have another angle prepared. He had prepared for an absent duke and a socially uncertain woman. He had not prepared for this. He spoke very little for the remainder of the evening. Thomasina ate her dessert. She tasted something she recognized with faint unease, relief, and under it, gratitude, and under that, something she had not fully examined yet. She looked at the Duke across the length of the table. He had returned to his wine and was listening to the conversation to his left with the polite attention of a man who has said what he meant to say and considers the matter concluded. She did not look at him long enough to be noticed looking. She noted, nevertheless, the line of his shoulders and the way he held his glass, and the fact that he had not looked in her direction once since speaking, not because he was avoiding it, she thought, but because he did not need to. He had said what was true. What she did with it was hers, which was, she thought, the precise difference between someone helping you and someone handling you, and she had spent 4 months mixing up which was which. She found him in the hall afterward collecting his coat. She had planned in the carriage on the way to the dinner what she would say if the occasion arose. She would say thank you, briefly and correctly, and she would go home. She had written this plan clearly in her mind and had considered it entirely achievable. What she said when she found him was, "You did not have to do that." He turned. He did not look surprised. He had an unsurprising quality in general, not because he was without feeling, but because he received the world without flinching from it. "I know," he said. "I was managing it. You were. I had a response prepared." She could hear in her own voice a quality she associated with speaking to people she already trusted, which was alarming given the timeline. "I have always managed." "Yes," he said. "It is important to me," she said, "to have managed, not to have been managed for." He looked at her. The hall was quiet. The dinner was on the other side of a door, voices warm and low, someone laughing at something. A single candle on the side table between them, his coat in his hands. "I know," he said, "I'm sorry." She had expected a defense. The apology threw her completely, which she found irritating, because it had circumvented her prepared position, and she was not sure how to continue. "Why did you then?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, the thoughtful quiet, not the evasive kind. "Because I don't like it," he said. "The particular kind of thing he does, the public version of it, calibrated for deniability, designed so there is always a way to call it innocent." He said it without heat, which was a more effective register than heat. "It is not about you specifically." I would have said the same thing regardless of who the target was. She looked at him. "It is somewhat about you," he said quietly, which was an addition she had not anticipated, and his voice had changed in a way she recognized and would have preferred not to. The candle between them, the dinner sounds, the coat in his hands. "You said you intended to return to London in the autumn," she said. "I did say that. Are you still intending to?" He was quiet for 1 full beat. 2. "I am finding," he said carefully, "that my intentions on that subject have shifted." She had known, if she was honest, that this was where the lane and the style and the morning rain were arriving. She had known it since the morning principal sat on his foot, and she had felt, entirely without planning to, something settle. She had known it and had continued walking the lane, which was its own form of answer. "I see," she said. "Do you object?" She thought about this as honestly as she could, which was the only way she knew how to think. "No," she said. He nodded once, with the quiet of a man settling something he has been attending to carefully. "Good night, Miss Ashford." "Good night, Your Grace." She went home. She sat in the kitchen with her aunt's tea and principal on her lap, and she thought about men who listened and what it meant when one of them stayed. Principal settled his chin on her knee and looked up at her with the expression he used when he had already arrived at a conclusion and was waiting for her to catch up. He had used this expression the first morning in the lane. He had used it consistently since. She scratched his ears. He closed his eyes with the satisfaction of a creature who has been patient for a reasonable length of time and is now receiving appropriate acknowledgement. "You knew," she told him. He did not dispute this. She finished her tea. She thought about the hall and the candle, and the particular way he had said, "I am sorry." not apologetically, not with any performance of contrition, but with the directness of someone who means it exactly. She thought about 6 weeks of early mornings and how she had stopped, at some point in the 3rd or 4th week, thinking of them as something she was attending to carefully, and had started thinking of them as simply the good part of the day. She went to bed. She slept, which was not what she had expected. The dinner at the Penhallow Arms in the 2nd week of September was 8 people, a farewell for Captain Hartwell, who was going to Exeter for the remainder of the year, and a reasonable Burgundy. Thomasina attended because she liked the captain. She had also prepared. She had been preparing in one form or another since November. 4 months of carrying her own account of the library, and the card party and the 12 witnesses, knowing it was true and knowing, the particular corrosive knowing, that truth and being believed are 2 separate conditions, and one of them depends entirely on who else is in the room. She had grown over those months a quality she had not had before. Not caution exactly, not defeat, but a specific clarity about what she could and could not change, and a willingness to act on the things she could. She was finished being patient with Gerald Fenwick. She had been patient for 4 months, and it had produced exactly nothing. She had other skills. Gerald Fenwick was at the far end of the table. He had the flattened quality he had carried since the dinner at Mrs. Forsyth's, the brightness of a man who has revised his assessment of his own position. He was not warm to her. He was also not aggressive. He had been operating in a middle register, civil, slightly watchful bound, for 3 weeks. She had not relaxed. The dinner ran through its courses. The captain was toasted twice, which was correct. The Burgundy improved as the evening progressed, as it tends to. Fenwick waited until the end, when the carriages were beginning to be called for, and people were standing up from the table in the way that suggests the evening is done. He leaned toward her, low enough that only the nearest 2 people would hear. His tone was almost kind, which was the most dangerous variation. "Miss Ashford," he said, "I hope there are no hard feelings between us. I think we may have both had a difficult spring." Thomasina set down her glass. She set it down slowly, with great care, the way she did when she was thinking about the next thing very precisely. "None at all," she said. "I think you simply misremember the history." He smiled slightly, his recovered ground smile. "Do I? You remember that I behaved badly at Mrs. Forsyth's card party when you proposed?" She kept her voice pleasant and her pace unhurried. "I remember that you proposed in the library in November on a Tuesday evening when I had gone to find a book, and that I declined politely, and that you said I would regret it, and that I said I doubted that. Those are the facts as they happened." Word for word. The nearest 2 people were watching their wine glasses with extreme attention. "You then," she continued, "told 15 people that I had made a scene when you chose not to pursue me, which is an interesting reversal, given that it was a Tuesday evening, and I had only wanted Cowper's letters." The silence at her end of the table was complete. "I think you told the story you would have preferred," she said, "and I think most of Briarfield has by now done the arithmetic." She picked up her glass again. "I do not have hard feelings. I have a very clear memory. There is a difference." Gerald Fenwick had nothing to say. He left 11 minutes later, before the carriages were properly called, which every person present noticed, and nobody felt the need to mention. She looked across the table. Sebastian Ravenscroft was watching her with the expression of a man who has just seen something he will not forget. He had said nothing. He had not needed to. She had not needed him to. She raised her glass very slightly. He raised his in return. He walked her home, not because she had asked, she had not, but because the evening was clear and the walk was 10 minutes, and he had offered it simply, without performance, and she had said yes without pretending to consider it. Her aunt was ahead with Dorinda and Mrs. Forsyth, and she and the Duke walked at a pace that was comfortable rather than efficient, which is a different kind of pace entirely. The village was quiet at that hour. Late summer has its own sounds. The cooling of the air, the last birds making final announcements, the light going amber and then grey around the edges of the hedgerows. Briarfield in September smelled of turned earth and wood smoke, and something almost sweet coming off the fields. Principal was sitting at the garden gate when they arrived. He had been left at home. He should not have known what time they would return, or that there was anything to be waiting for. He sat in the gap of the gate with the patient authority of a dog who has made the calculation and merely been waiting for everyone else to catch up. He knows, the Duke said. He always knows, Thomasina said. He simply doesn't announce it. He looked at the dog, then at the gate, then at her. There was something different in his expression from what he usually showed, which was already not very usual, less composed or differently composed, the way a person looks when they have decided to say something and are now saying it. I spoke to Fenwick, he said, before the dinner at Mrs. Forsyth's, directly. She waited. I told him that I had been in the library at Mrs. Forsyth's that November evening, that I had stepped in from the hall and overheard the conversation, that I had a clear recollection of how it went. She held this very still. "Were you?" she asked. "There?" "No," he said. He had the quality of a man who is being honest about a specific dishonesty and does not feel guilty about it. But he did not know that. And I thought the point worth making. She looked at the garden gate, at Principal, who had stood up and was making his assessment in real time. "He will not say anything more," the Duke added. She should have had objections. She had objections ready, about managing her own situation, about the importance of having managed it, about all the things she had said in the hall at Mrs. Forsyth's. They were valid objections, all of them. She believed them. What she felt, standing at the gate in the last of the evening light, was the specific sensation of a weight she had been carrying for 4 months simply being gone. Not taken, not removed. Gone. Like weather that has ended. That was, she said, not a small thing. It was a small lie, he said. I found it proportionate. Principal walked over and sat on Sebastian's foot. Thomasina looked at her dog. She looked at the man standing in the gate of her garden in the September evening, and she thought about lanes and morning rain, and Flemish horticultural prints, and the specific amber of light through old glass, and the way a person can become, without your having planned for it, without your having prepared, a part of the shape of your ordinary days. Your intentions, she said, the shifted ones. Yes, he said. Have they shifted further? He looked at her in the direct way he had, not performing the look, just looking. Considerably, he said, in a particular direction. He was quiet for 1 beat. The owl in the lane gave its preliminary announcement. The garden smelled of lavender and late roses. In a very specific direction, he said, if you would like to hear it. She had known. She had known since the morning he crouched in the lane, and since the stile in the barley fields, and since the afternoon she had held an empty bucket, and he had been interested rather than offended. She had known, and had kept walking the lane, which was its own kind of answer, though she had not admitted it as such until this moment. I would, she said. He took a breath. Not a dramatic one. The breath of a person who has arrived at the edge of something they have been walking toward. Thomasina. He said her name with the quiet deliberateness she had come to recognize, the way of someone who considers words worth taking care of. I've been trying for several weeks to identify a moment at which to ask you something that would not seem either hasty or evasive. I have not been able to find one, which suggests I should stop looking for it and simply ask. That, she said, is very sensible. Will you marry me? She had known this was coming. She had known it with the certainty one develops about things one has not admitted to knowing. She had known it, and had not stopped walking the lane, and had not avoided the stile, and had let her dog sit on his foot without apology, and had meant it each of those mornings when she had walked home, thinking about men who listened. She had known it, and had not stepped back from it, which was, she understood now, a choice she had been making every morning for 6 weeks. Yes, she said. The word came out very steady. She had not planned for that. She had thought in the vague imagining one does of such moments that there would be more preamble, more of herself to manage, more of the composure she had been keeping in order for 4 months. What there was instead was just the word and the evening, and the sound of him exhaling. He exhaled, once, slowly, like a man who had not quite known he was holding his breath. The ember of tension she had not known was in him simply went out. Good, he said. I am, yes. Good. He did not move immediately, neither did she. The garden smelled of lavender and the end of summer, the particular sweetness of roses going over, and in the lane behind them the owl made its evening claim again. She was aware, very precisely, of the space between them. Not as distance, but as something held between two people who are deciding what comes next. His amber eyes in the last of the light. The quiet in him that had been there from the beginning. The kind of quiet that is not absence but attention. She thought, this is the sort of thing one does not know, one has been waiting for, until it arrives. She did not say this. She was not yet at the stage of saying such things aloud, but she noted it in the place she kept things she was not ready to examine yet, with the sense that she would be examining it very soon. Principal stood up from his foot and walked through the garden gate with the composed dignity of an animal who has accomplished what he intended and has no remaining business in this part of the lane. She watched him go. She looked at the gate. She looked at Sebastian Ravenscroft, who was looking at her with an expression she thought she might spend a considerable portion of her life looking at and finding each time something slightly new in it. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She went inside. She made tea. She sat in the kitchen while Principal settled onto his hearthrug, and her aunt appeared in the doorway with the expression of a woman who has been awake and has opinions, and Thomasina told her, and her aunt sat down at the kitchen table and poured a second cup and said, "Your father would have approved." She said it simply, which was how her aunt said important things. She did not elaborate because she did not need to. The Reverend Ashford had had a view about people that you knew the real ones by whether they paid attention to things that mattered and let go of things that didn't, and that people who were good at the first were usually good at the second, and that this was rarer than it ought to be. He had thought this about books. He had also thought this about people. He had been, in Thomasina's experience, consistently right. Thomasina thought about a book on Flemish horticultural prints, walked from one house to another, because someone thought it would be of interest. "I know," she said. They were married in October, in the church where her father had served for 22 years. The Reverend Cope officiated. Mrs. Aldrich Ashford wept in the good manner. Dorinda Pell wept in every manner available. Principal was not permitted inside the church and was discovered after the ceremony, sitting on Sebastian's foot in the churchyard, which everyone agreed was appropriate. Gerald Fenwick had departed Briarfield in early September, citing a prolonged desire for his uncle's estate in Northumberland and the benefits of northern air. He did not return. Whether the northern air suited him remained a subject of mild and entirely disinterested local debate, which was conducted without urgency, because nobody was particularly curious about the answer. The dame school continued in the vestry of St. Michael's on Tuesdays and Thursdays. In the following spring, a proper room was arranged, good windows, 2 long elm wood tables, and a small collection of books donated quietly and without announcement. Thomas Kendall, the eldest pupil, wrote the Duke a letter of thanks in a hand that was still imperfect but improving, and the Duke kept it on his desk in the study, to the left of the inkwell, where it stayed. Briarstone Hall was, by general account, a warmer house. Fires lit earlier in the season, hallways that no longer echoed, the atmosphere of a place that was being lived in rather than maintained. A copy of Flemish horticultural prints, found in the library, was moved to the sitting room that faced the garden because someone thought it should have more light. Principal lived 11 more years, which is quite a long time for a beagle. He spent them in the manner he had always spent everything, at the center of whatever mattered, forming opinions that turned out to be correct, sitting on feet that deserved sitting on. He was buried under the elm at the south end of the walled garden, where the sun came first in the morning, because that had been his preferred position, and because what a dog prefers should be attended to. And if you were to ask Thomasina Ravenscroft, Duchess of Briarstone, what she would have done differently on the 12th of July in the summer of 1815, she will tell you without much hesitation that she would have aimed better. Her husband, who is always within earshot when this subject comes up, will say nothing. He will wait. He will say, in a sense, Gerald Fenwick was useful. And she will say, Sebastian. And he will say, in a very limited sense. And she will not respond to this. She will look at Principal, who will be on the hearthrug with the expression of a dog who has heard this exact conversation before and considers its resolution satisfactory. She will look at her husband, who will be smiling. That slow, unhurried smile, the one that arrives like weather that was always coming. She will not respond. She will go back to her book. But she will be smiling too, which is perhaps what it means to have found the right person. Not the one who arrives with declarations or impresses you with their certainty. The one who walks the same lane in the same early morning and notices the elm and asks about the route and stays when the rain comes. The one who is there when you are managing something difficult and does not try to manage it for you, but simply stays. Who is there again the next morning and the morning after that? The one who finds you interesting, the particular you, not the version that is easy to like, not the version that performs well at dinner, but the one that holds an empty bucket in a garden and has no apology for why. That one. Stories told with quiet love.
July sun on the vicarage stone. I waited on the steps, thought I was alone. 27 past the hour, gate began to swing. I tipped the water down, wrong man, wrong everything. Watercress on a velvet coat, I soaked through Duke in my heart and my throat. He should have shouted, he should have turned away. Instead he looked at me and simply said, anyone I know, amber eyes like old window glass. He didn't flinch, he let the moment pass. And that's the day my whole world changed its course. All from a bucket and a runaway horse of a heart. Oh, I aimed for someone else, but the wrong one caught the fall. Dripping wet and laughing soft, he was the rightest wrong of all. Take the lane, take the rain, take the morning slow. Some love stories start with a bucket you didn't mean to throw. Every morning down the hedgerow lane, a beagle at his boots calling out his name. Principal knew before I ever guessed. Hearts don't need convincing, they just rest. He asked about my father, the books he lent. Every quiet Tuesday, every word well spent. Not a man who charms you, not a man who lies, just a man who listens like the truth surprise. I came to see what was true, he said it plain, no dressing on the words. And I felt something settle, like when a bird's finally landing after all that flight. He was the calm after every stormy night. Oh, I aimed for someone else, but the wrong one caught the fall. Dripping wet and laughing soft, he was the rightest wrong of all. Take the lane, take the rain, take the morning slow. Some love stories start with a bucket you didn't mean to throw. He stood up at the table when the whispers came, said the truth out loud and called it by its name. Not to save me, just because it's right. And that's the difference, that's the quiet light. No declarations, no grand parade, just a man who stayed and stayed and stayed. Every morning, rain or shine, he'd come, till staying was the only home I'd known. So I aimed for someone else. Thank God my aim was wrong, 'cause the Duke of Briarstone turned into my whole life song. Take the lane, take the rain, take the vows we spoke. Every love worth having starts with a bucket and a joke. Principal on the hearthrug, watching us still. Amber eyes and elm trees on the hill. I'll tell you what I'd change if you ask me true. Nothing, love, not one thing, just my aim, maybe not you.